Hello everyone. In this video series I'm going to be talking about scene loading components. And scene loading components are one type of cell object loader in the dynamic loading kit. And hopefully you've watched the other videos in my series. This one's a little more advanced and it assumes that you have watched those videos. If you have watched those videos, you'll know that the cell object loader is just the component that's responsible for getting new objects into the scene. So we have two types of scene loader components. The first is the regular scene loader. And this component uses the application.loadLevel additive method. This method does block the main thread, however, so it's not very performant. If you are using Unity Indie, I do recommend using the prefab instantiator component if you can. The only time you won't be able to use the prefab instantiator is if you have a lot of assets that are taking up a lot of memory. And you'll notice when you go to build your project, you'll get an out-of-memory exception if this resources folder is too large. In that case, you will need to go ahead and use one of the scene loader components. Now, while the regular scene loader component is available to both Pro and Indie users, and it does block the main thread, we also have the async scene loader, which is only available to Unity Pro members. And this component uses the application.loadLevel additive async method, which loads the assets in a background loading thread. Now, theoretically, this should allow you to create a streaming world without any hiccups in gameplay. And in fact, if you look at the docs here, this sentence here states exactly that. So I imagine they did have that in mind when designing this method. But they did not test it properly, because with Unity 4 there is quite a big performance hit when using this method. It is still better than the prefab instantiation or the regular scene loading component, but it's still not very good. Fortunately, Unity 5 aims to improve, if not downright fix, this issue. In my limited testing, I've seen a 500% increase in performance, and I'm hopeful that future builds will see an even greater performance boost. Now, I'm not saying to go out and buy Unity 5 Pro. There's still no guarantee that the async loading method will be a perfect streaming solution. I definitely need to conduct more testing before giving it my seal of approval, but right now the future does look a little brighter. The last thing I want to talk about in this video is how scene loading works behind the scenes. So every cell object loader has the same goal, which is to get your cell objects into the scene. And your cell objects, in my project here, you can see I've got some prefab set up. And these are just my terrains. And these are my cell objects. Now, you may have additional child objects parented to this cell object, and that's perfectly fine. But when we're talking about cell objects, we're talking about that base object, that root object, the one that's labeled name underscore row underscore column. So after loading those objects, we need to get a reference to them, because the dynamic loading kit needs to manipulate them, possibly move their position, and it also needs to unload them when they're not needed anymore. Now, with the prefab instantiator component, this is relatively simple. Well, it's very simple actually, because the instantiate method actually returns a reference to that object. Unfortunately, however, with scene loading, we don't get that reference, so we need to go ahead and find it ourselves. Now, I found that the most efficient way to do this is to use GameObject.findGameObjects with tag, which searches for an array of game objects that have a specific tag. And the tag, of course, is setTheInspector. The problem with this method is that the objects that are being searched for must be in an activated state. And this leads to some interesting problems, which I'll get to in the next video.